So this week, Berman speaks about and troubles the construction of childhood as a separate part of life, as a distinct time in life that is in need of protection from the dangers of the world. She argues that these discourses of protection and the idea that we can save the innocence of childhood upholds an image of the child as a neutral, pure subject that is not permeated by the social and political contexts in which she lives. So in this way, the child exists in this sort of pure and innocent bubble separate from the world. This image of childhood actually acts to separate children from society. And Berman argues that in this way, children don't count as active parts of society within this lens. She writes that measures are taken to actually, to apparently protect them, yet simultaneously exclude them from accessing shared spaces in society, and also their parents are excluded as well. There are many places where children are not allowed, and we can think of some of these. Yet there are also many places that are designated and designed as places for children. So examining these places that are designed for children might bring interesting conversations about the image of the child represented here. We might consider playgrounds and the image of the happy, developing child playing in a playground. Yet when we look closer with a critical lens, we might notice that these places are not neutral or innocent, that there are theories of childhood that inform the construction of these spaces and serve to uphold a particular narrative of the productive, learning, growing child. And there's a romanticized ideal of childhood that is particularly apparent in children's manufactured spaces, such as playgrounds, parks, etc. And these manufactured spaces demonstrate a separation of the child from the living world. Furthermore, children in many parts of the world do not play in this way, and the idea of the playground is very much built on a Euro-colonial enterprise of a manufactured childhood. Berman argues that this image of childhood as untainted and separate from the tensions of and nuances of the world is false and creates conditions where childhoods that do not look like this, which many do not, become less worthy and even penalized. And blame is placed in the individual and the family as a cause of the problematic child, or this undesired form of childhood. So in Chapter 5, Berman also goes into unpacking early intervention. So she says that intervention is a huge topic of interest in early childhood education, namely because of the economic benefits of early intervention and the promise of a properly developing and productive child. And this warrants, in some ways, our importance as a field. Yet there's a huge danger in promising the value of early intervention, and Berman goes into this in detail. Early intervention sits well with neoliberal policies that focus on the optimisms of ensuring children's developmental abilities. And there's sort of this narrative of hope that's attached to this, much like that of discourses of resiliency, which Berman also deconstructs in this chapter. Yet still, Berman writes that the onus of development is back on what we see as the resourceful individual rather than on their environment. So moreover, early intervention infers an origin point, a prior to, something that's prior to late. So Berman writes that this installs a developmental trajectory that is predetermined from the get-go. In assuming early intervention will benefit what happens later, we're assuming that we already know what later is and what later will entail. So there's a predetermined assumption and outcome for what will happen. Yet as Sarah Almond writes, there are many could-bes. So then the question is, what is early intervention assuming or perhaps limiting? There's a focus on what a child is desired to become rather than what they are in the moment. And again, there's an essence of productivity and a cumulative gain in the notion of preparing for the future and readiness, that focuses on what else we need, what next, what else can I have, rather than what we already have or what is in the moment that might be of value. So in this quote, Berman writes, early intervention is a device, a technology mobilized by the misleadingly named social investment state, a state that does not invest in us, but rather demands us to invest in it. So I think in this quote, she's talking about how we invest ourselves in the state with a will to pursue and develop and gain. So this week in your week 5 notes, I want you to choose a quote from chapter 5 that interests you, something that spoke to you and gathers your interest, and write a 300 to 400 word response that demonstrates a critical engagement with this text. So really take on a critical lens as you're unpacking this quote. What does this quote suggest, and why might it matter in the field of early childhood education? So write 300 to 400 words on that, and then post your notes to Moodle by Sunday at 11:55 p.m. And then lastly, just add one word to the word bank or add to another's definitions. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.